vineyard. Can I ask whether anyone has any grapes at home at this point? Do you have any grapes at home? I know you work with them. You don't need any at home. You work with these, right? Are y'all aware that we do have a vineyard out on the west side of the property here? Have y'all visited out there? Just seen it driving by? Haven't gone out there to pick any grapes or anything? Not yet. Oh boy. Okay, so here's what I'm going to talk about. These are all the things that I think are important for you to know before you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy a grapevine. And now I'm going to say I don't recommend you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy a grapevine. And I'll explain why. Okay, so I'm going to talk about where to locate grapes in your yard or at your house or on your property, general. Considerations for the soil preparation for planting, pest control and pest management. I'll talk about varieties that I recommend you look at planting, and hopefully I will direct you away from varieties that will end up causing you a whole lot more trouble than you think it's worth. Talk about trellising, site preparation, some information on ordering grapevines, because like I said, I just eliminated the two probably the easiest. Oh, let me include Walmart. Don't go to Walmart and buy grapevines. And then some places where you can get some information in addition to what I'm going to tell you this morning. Okay, first, grapes like soils that are well drained. They like locations that have full sun. If there's a place on your property or in your yard where there's going to be shade for a portion of the day, that is not going to be good for the grapes themselves. The grapevines will grow, but the fruit will not be able to ripen. The fruit have to have direct sun exposure to ripen. So you don't want shade. We need good air drainage. What we're saying there is, like this morning, it got cool last night. There's a lot of dew. It got wet. Everything's wet. We want air to flow through that vineyard to drain some of that water off, to dry the water off those vines, and off the fruit especially. This time of year is not critical because we've already harvested fruit, right? But when the fruit are growing, if the water is sitting on the grapes, they'll mold. I mean, we're just encouraging mold growth. So the more air we can get moving through that vineyard, the better you're going to be, the higher the quality of your fruit, and the happier you're going to be. Okay. So air drainage is a point. We want to avoid frost. There are 2 times a year the frost is a critical point, a critical issue, in the spring and in the fall. Here in this area, we don't have a whole lot of problem with late fall or early fall frost. We have a significant issue with early spring frosts. And that becomes a problem because these grapes have been dormant over the winter, excuse me, and they are looking for signs of it's time for me to grow. And depending on the variety that you pick, some of these grapes tend to shoot out earlier in the spring, and almost 100% of the time we have a late spring frost, and those early shooting varieties get zapped, they get nipped. And some of these varieties, this is why I spend a lot of time talking about varieties, some of these varieties I don't recommend in this area for that specific reason. They're going to shoot out, they're going to try to set they're going to start to bloom, and then they're going to be hit with a frost, and they won't bloom again, and you won't have a crop. That is, if the vine survives. It was last year, no, was it this year we had that late, it was this year we had that late spring, really hard frost. And I won't tell you where, but let me say I'm consulting for a person who's trying to put in a commercial vineyard, and I had told him not to plant a variety of grapes, in which he planted about 5 acres of. And this spring, we lost every single plant he planted because we had that hard frost late in the spring. It's an early shooting variety, they were grown out way too far. They already put out some blossoms, and it killed the vines right to the ground. You know, so don't do that. So frost avoidance is huge. I said full sun. Okay. We want to control the vineyard for pest harborages. When I'm talking about pest harborages right now, I'm talking about insects. Okay, there are 6- and 8-legged pests, and there are no-legged pests, and there are 4-legged pests, right? And so right now I'm talking about the molds and mildews and the insects that we're going to be worried about. Okay. One of the most important considerations we can make for a vineyard is not planting our grapes anywhere. Let me reverse this. We don't want to have wild grapes near where we're trying to grow what we want to cultivate. Okay, so for example, if you have a wooded hedge and there are native grapevines or wild grapevines in that area, eliminate them. Okay, because I guarantee they're harboring all kinds of things that you don't want in your vineyard. Okay, those vines are adapted to living with those creatures. Your vines are not going to be. Okay, so eliminate them insofar as possible. Obviously, don't go on your neighbor's property and start cutting things down. That would not do well, at least without their permission. Okay, so we want to eliminate pest harborages. I'm going to come back to this again, but if you remove anything from your grapevines, if you prune anything, get it out of the vineyard and dispose of it. Burn it. Don't leave it in the vineyard. We're not interested in natural fertilizing with grape clippings. Okay, get them out of there because they can become a pest harborage. Vegetation, as a general statement, we want to eliminate the vegetation under where the canopy is going to grow. Okay, so we want to keep that grass out of the way because the grass itself can become a harborage for pests. Next, how do we orient these things? And this may be something you haven't really thought about, but there is an ongoing debate about orientation relative to the sun. Should these rows run north-south? Should they run east-west? You can imagine in a crop like this that is dependent on full sun, you want to get the maximum sun exposure to all the plants. And so we in academic terms, we have a whole lot of debates about this. We do lots of research on, plant these things north-south versus east-west or something else. So I'm just going to tell you, northeastern and eastern exposures of the land itself is preferred. Okay, so if you have options on your property, these are the sides of the slope that you want to be planting your vines on. Beyond that, it's much more important to plant your grapes in the location on the ground that controls for erosion than north, south, east, west, whatever. Okay, so I do not get real wound up in how they are oriented to the sun. I am much more concerned about controlling erosion on the ground because I'm going to be ripping up all the grass under the canopy, and I don't want all the soil washing away. Right? So don't be concerned about orientation relative to the sun. Be more concerned about which side of a slope you plant on. Okay? The reason that I suggest a northern exposure is anytime you have a southern exposure, assuming you have some slope. Let me make that clear. If you've got flat land, it doesn't make any difference, right? But if you've got any sort of slope to your land, a northern exposure is going to give you a delayed warming relative to a southern exposure in the spring, right? The sun's going to be lower in the horizon in the spring on the northern side, so it's going to tend to be cooler on the northern side of that land, and it's going to delay the sprouting of those vines, which is going to further protect you from a late spring frost, right? If you put it on the southern side, The southern side of a hill, I'll say a hill, always warms up earlier in the spring than the northern side. So definitely suggest northeastern or eastern exposures.